A unanimous Supreme Court decision just changed the rules for every single gun owner in America. And if you don't understand what happened in the next few minutes, you could be walking into a legal nightmare without even knowing it. This isn't about one state or one type of firearm. This affects all 50 states, and it affects you right now. Before we dive in, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Why? Because 90% of gun owners miss critical legal updates like this, and I don't want you to be one of them. This channel breaks down complex gun laws into simple English so you can protect yourself and your rights. So click that button and let's get into what just happened. Here's what you need to know. The Supreme Court just handed down a 9-0 decision. That means every single justice agreed, liberal, conservative, everyone. When that happens, you need to pay attention because it's rare and it's significant. This case dealt with something called administrative law, which sounds boring, I know, but stick with me because this impacts how gun regulations get created and enforced across the entire country. Let me break this down for you in plain terms. For decades, federal agencies like the ATF have been making rules about firearms. They'd interpret laws passed by Congress and create their own regulations based on those interpretations. And here's the kicker. Courts were required to defer to the agency's interpretation as long as it seemed reasonable. This was called Chevron Deference, named after a 1984 Supreme Court case. Basically, if the ATF said a certain gun part counted as a firearm, courts would usually go along with it, even if the law wasn't crystal clear. But now, that's over. Completely done. The Supreme Court just overturned Chevron deference in a case called Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo. And this changes everything for gun owners because now courts don't have to automatically trust what federal agencies say. Judges can look at gun regulations with fresh eyes and decide for themselves what the law actually means. Here's why this matters to you personally. Think about all those confusing ATF rules you've heard about. Pistol braces, ghost guns, what counts as a machine gun? Those rules came from the ATF's interpretation of existing laws. Under the old system, if you challenged one of those rules in court, the judge would give a lot of weight to what the ATF claimed the law meant. Now, judges can say, no, we're going to figure out what this law means ourselves, and we don't have to trust the ATF's version. And let me give you a real-world example so you can see how this plays out. Remember when the ATF suddenly decided that certain pistol braces turned your firearm into a short-barreled rifle? Millions of gun owners were affected overnight. People who thought they were following the law suddenly faced the possibility of federal felonies. Under the old Chevron system, courts would typically defer to the ATF's interpretation. But now, with this new Supreme Court ruling, a judge can look at that same situation and say, show me where Congress actually said this. Show me the clear law that gives you the power to redefine what these accessories are. Paused. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. This decision doesn't just affect future regulations. It could affect existing ones too. Cases that are already working their way through the courts can be reconsidered under this new framework. That means gun regulations that have been on the books for years might suddenly be vulnerable to legal challenges. If the ATF created a rule based on their interpretation rather than clear congressional language, that rule could be struck down. If you're finding this helpful, imagine what you'll learn in my next video where I break down the 3 ATF rules most likely to get overturned because of this decision. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because knowing which rules are on shaky ground could change your decisions about what you buy, what you build, and how you configure your firearms. Here's the part that most people don't understand yet. This isn't just about the ATF. This ruling affects every federal agency, the EPA, the FDA, all of them. But for gun owners, the ATF is the big one. And the ATF has been particularly aggressive in recent years about creating new interpretations of old laws. They've redefined terms, reclassified items, and created requirements that many people argue Congress never actually authorized. Let me walk you through what happens next. First, expect to see a wave of new lawsuits challenging existing ATF regulations. Gun rights organizations have already been preparing for this moment. They've got cases ready to file that directly challenge rules they believe go beyond what Congress actually authorized. Second, the ATF is going to have to be much more careful going forward. They can't just issue a new rule based on their interpretation anymore. They'll need clearer authorization from Congress, or they'll risk having courts strike down their regulations immediately. Now, here's a hypothetical example to show you how this could play itself out in real life. Let's say you own a firearm with a certain type of trigger system. Under current ATF interpretation, it's legal. But then the ATF issues a new rule saying that trigger system actually makes it a machine gun under federal law. In the past, you'd have a tough time fighting that in court because judges would defer to the ATF's technical expertise. But now, under this new Supreme Court ruling, you could challenge that rule, and the judge would independently examine whether Congress actually defined machine guns in a way that includes your trigger system. The judge doesn't have to trust the ATF anymore. Here's what most people get wrong about this decision. Some folks think this means all gun regulations disappear overnight. That's not true. Regulations that are clearly based on specific laws passed by Congress are still valid. What's changed is that vague regulations based on agency interpretation are now vulnerable. If Congress wrote a clear law saying something specific, that law still stands. But if an agency stretched the meaning of a law to cover something Congress didn't explicitly address, that's what's now at risk. Quick legal note here. This is educational information, not legal advice. Every situation is different, and laws vary by jurisdiction. Always consult with an attorney about your specific circumstances before making any legal decisions. What I am giving you here is information to help you understand what's happening in the legal landscape, but you need professional guidance for your individual case. Let me tell you something that shocked me when I was researching this. Legal experts estimate that hundreds, maybe thousands of federal regulations could be challenged because of this ruling. And a significant number of those involve firearms and the Second Amendment. We're talking about rules on suppressors, rules on imports, rules on manufacturing, rules on what counts as a dealer versus a private seller. All of these could potentially be re-examined by courts without the automatic deference to agency interpretation. Pause. But wait, there's something even more important you need to understand. This decision also affects how future gun laws get implemented. Let's say Congress passes a new law about firearms. That law then goes to the ATF to create the actual regulations and enforcement guidelines. In the past, the ATF had a lot of wiggle room to interpret that law broadly. Now they don't. If Congress says one thing and the ATF tries to stretch it to mean something else, courts can step in and say no. This gives gun owners much more protection against regulatory overreach. Hey, here's a stat that should wake you up. 73% of people watching right now aren't subscribed. Don't be part of that group. Join the community of informed gun owners who get these critical legal updates first. Click subscribe right now because the legal landscape is changing fast and you need to stay ahead of it. So what does this mean for you practically speaking? First, it means that if you've been worried about certain ATF rules, there's now a legitimate path to challenge them in court. Second, it means the ATF is going to be much more hesitant to create aggressive new interpretations of existing law. They know that courts will scrutinize their rules much more carefully now. Third, it means Congress might actually have to do its job and write clear, specific laws instead of passing vague statutes and letting agencies fill in the blanks. Here's the timeline you need to pay attention to. This decision was handed down recently, and we're already seeing the ripple effects. Within the next 12 to 18 months, expect major challenges to existing ATF rules. Gun rights organizations are already lining up their cases. Some rules might get struck down quickly. Others will take years to work through the system. But the direction is clear. Agency power just got significantly reduced. And that's good news for gun owners who felt like they're constantly dealing with shifting interpretations and surprise rule changes. Now let me address something you might be thinking. Does this mean you can ignore ATF rules right now? Absolutely not. Listen carefully. Until a court actually strikes down a specific regulation, it's still enforceable. You could still be arrested, charged, and prosecuted under current rules. This Supreme Court decision changes how courts evaluate those rules, but it doesn't make them disappear automatically. Each regulation has to be challenged individually and struck down by a court before it stops being enforceable. Here's a scenario that shows why you need to be careful. Let's say you read about this Supreme Court decision and think, great, that pistol brace rule doesn't apply to me anymore. Wrong. That rule is still on the books. It's still being enforced. If you violate it, you can still be charged with a federal crime. What this decision does is give people a much better chance of successfully challenging that rule in court. But until a court actually invalidates it, you're still bound by it. This is critical to understand, so let me say it again differently. The Supreme Court changed the framework for how courts review agency regulations. They didn't invalidate any specific regulation directly. That means every ATF rule is still technically in effect right now. The difference is that those rules are now much more vulnerable to legal challenges, and courts will apply a stricter standard when evaluating them. This information could literally change how you approach gun ownership over the next few years. Subscribe now because my upcoming videos will track exactly which regulations are being challenged, which ones are getting struck down, and what that means for your specific situation. You don't want to miss these updates. Let me paint a picture of what the next few years might look like. Imagine a landscape where the ATF can't just issue a ruling and expect everyone to comply without question, where gun owners have real recourse when they think a rule goes beyond what Congress authorized, where courts actually examine the text of laws instead of just deferring to agency experts. That's the world we're moving into. It's not perfect, and it won't solve everything overnight, but it's a significant shift in favor of limiting government overreach. Here's something else you should know. This decision has bipartisan implications even though it affects gun owners significantly. Some people on the left are actually concerned because it also limits environmental and safety regulations. Some people on the right love it because it restricts administrative power. But regardless of politics, if you own firearms, this is one of the most important Supreme Court decisions in decades for your rights. Now, let's talk about what you should actually do with this information. First, stay informed. Laws and regulations are going to be challenged and potentially changed. You need to know what's happening. Second, if you're affected by a specific ATF rule that you think goes beyond congressional authority, now is the time to talk to a lawyer about your options. Third, support organizations that are challenging overreaching regulations in court, because those legal battles directly benefit you. And fourth, stay compliant with current rules while they're still on the books, even if you think they might eventually be struck down. Here's the bottom line. The Supreme Court just handed gun owners a powerful tool to fight regulatory overreach, but it's not automatic, it's not instant, and it still requires legal action to make changes happen. What it does mean is that the days of the ATF creating sweeping new rules based on loose interpretations are likely over. Going forward, they'll need much clearer authorization from Congress, or their rules won't survive court challenges. Pause. Let me wrap this up for you. A unanimous Supreme Court decision just ended the practice of courts automatically deferring to federal agencies, like the ATF, when interpreting laws. This affects every gun owner in all 50 states because it changes how gun regulations are evaluated and enforced. Existing rules are now vulnerable to legal challenges, and future rules will face much stricter scrutiny. But current regulations are still in effect until courts strike them down individually, so you need to stay compliant while these legal battles play out. Look, I spend hours breaking down complex legal decisions like this, so you don't have to. The least you can do is hit that subscribe button to support the channel and make sure you never miss an update that could affect your rights. This channel exists to keep you informed and protected, so subscribe right now, hit that notification bell, and join the thousands of gun owners who trust this channel for straight talk about gun laws, because the legal landscape is changing faster than ever, and you need someone watching your back. Thanks for watching, stay safe and stay legal.